Welcome back, everyone. On behalf of the Russell Sage Foundation, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, and Princeton University, it's my pleasure to welcome you back to the Summer Institutes in Computational Social Science. Hello to everyone here in Princeton, hello to everyone at the partner locations, and hello to everyone tuning in on the live stream. So today we're going to talk about experiments. So the schedule for today is as follows. Whoops. So I'm going to give a brief introduction to experiments. Then we're going to talk about moving beyond simple experiments, and then 4 strategies for doing experiments. We'll have a break at 10:15. Then I'll talk a little bit about zero variable cost data in Music Lab. This is a project that I did for my dissertation, and I'll talk a little bit about how I think we didn't realize it when I didn't realize it when I was doing it, but some of the ideas behind that might be helpful for designing lots of other experiments. Then we'll take a break, and then we'll have an alum of SICSS 2017, Abdullah Al-Maltouk, will talk about high throughput science using virtual labs. So a way of doing experiments much more quickly, which opens up a lot of new opportunities. Okay, so let's get started. So I want to briefly talk about what experiments are and how experiments are similar to they've been in the past and how they're different when you move them into a digital environment. So this is a study by Restivo and Van der Reyt about the impact of informal rewards on peer production. So they were interested in Wikipedia and why do people create entries on Wikipedia. So this is an example of what some social scientists call a public good, where you contribute to it and then everyone else can benefit. And so the question is, why does anyone contribute? Why doesn't everyone just wait for everyone else to contribute? So I would say that is a question. That is a puzzle if you have a certain view of human behavior. I think it's not really a puzzle if you have a different view of human behavior, but that is considered to be a puzzle. So they were interested in the role of informal peer rewards in encouraging people to contribute to public goods. So they wanted to know the effect of barn stars on contributing to Wikipedia. So barn stars are those things over there, and any Wikipedia member account can give it to any other Wikipedia account for doing something nice. So what did they do? So they looked through participants in Wikipedia, found those who are making lots of edits, and randomly gave them a barn star, and then measured the effect on future edits. So let's talk about what's the same. So this has a lot of elements that are similar to the elements that you would see in a normal experiment. So they had to recruit participants. They had to randomize to give some people a treatment and some people not. They have to deliver that treatment, and then they have to measure the outcomes subsequently. So this should all seem like what you would do in a Psych 101 lab experiment, except in this case, each of these steps was done in a fully digital way. So the recruiting participants happened through looking through the logs of Wikipedia. The randomization happened in their computer. The treatment and control were delivered, again, in a fully digital way, and the outcomes are all measured in a fully digital way. So what that means is that they actually had zero variable cost in the data. So they had 100 people in their experiment for basically the same cost. They could have had 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, 1,000,000. And that is what happens. Generally, the more of your experiment that runs through digital infrastructure, the lower the variable cost, the lower the cost for each additional person, which means you can run really, really large experiments. Now here, I think what's interesting about this also is that then the main limiting factor in their experiment is not cost. Usually we do as many people as we can. Here, their main limiting factor was actually ethics. So if they gave out 1 million barn stars, that would fundamentally alter the ecosystem of Wikipedia, and they did not want to do that. So this also goes back to some of the issues we talked about in the first day with ethics. So giving participants barn stars, that is not likely to cause any harm to that particular person. But if you deliver a big treatment into this ecosystem, you can have a harm to the context, even if there's not a clear harm to any individual. So I want to distinguish also between two kinds of things. So people use the word experiment kind of loosely. And I want to differentiate between, like, I'm going to experiment with a new kind of pasta sauce. That means, like, I'm going to cook a sauce that I've never cooked before, and then I'm going to eat it, and I'm going to see how it is. And so that is a certain kind of experiment. You could call it some people call it perturb and observe. So you do something different, you see what happens. So I want to distinguish that from a randomized controlled experiment where we randomly assign people to conditions, give one of those a treatment, and then measure the outcome for both and compare. So when I'm talking about experiments, I really mean randomized controlled experiments. I don't mean perturb and observe experiments. Okay? So experiments are just very, very powerful. It's like a relatively simple idea to us, it seems now. This is one of my favorite quotes illustrating that power. It's like, you don't harass women, you don't steal, and you've got to have a control group. That is one of the things that you can lose your job for at Harrah's, not running a control group. So Harrah's is a casino company, and they run tons of experiments on their customers. So if you've ever been to Harrah's, you've been in experiments. So the key thing here, though, one of the things I love about this is, first, how much it's clear that they love experiments. And second, how much it's clear that for them and a lot of other people, experiments are really about the control group and not the treatment group. So a lot of times social scientists think, oh, I'm going to create a treatment and I'm going to compare that treatment to the control group. What I've noticed is that in a lot of other settings, people are already delivering treatments. And so a lot of what is required to create an experiment is to create a control group. And that is sometimes actually the harder thing, is to convince a decision maker that is so confident that they have something that is going to help the casino make more money or help kids in a school or whatever, making sure to convince them to hold back some of the people in a control. So there really are like two ways to create an experiment, sort of. One is to deliver a treatment, and one is to create space for a control condition when the treatment is going to be delivered anyway. So that's what I just said. So in the social sciences, we often think of there being a continuum between lab experiments and field experiments. So lab experiments are these Psych 101 experiments that many of you have been in. And field experiments are experiments that happen out in the world, so not in an artificial environment, in a naturally occurring environment with people other than undergrad students doing more natural tasks for real stakes. So generally, sometimes people prefer field experiments, especially non-psychologists. I think psychologists tend to prefer lab experiments, in part because with lab experiments, you are able to do much more subtle things. You're able to really like adjust the environment in a very particular way to isolate a very particular thing. And psychologists love that. Some economists love that. I think sociologists tend not to love that so much. It's okay. So basically, we can think of this as a continuum. And where you want to be on this continuum depends in part on what your research question is. So I think increasingly we're going to also see a second continuum from analog to digital. And so the question here is, how much of your experiment takes advantage of digital infrastructure? So the Van der Weydt et al. Experiment took advantage of digital infrastructure for recruiting participants, randomizing, delivering the treatment, measuring the outcomes. That's a fully digital field experiment. So that's in the upper right-hand corner. To me, that's like a particularly exciting place to be. That's the place where we're going to see stuff that we haven't seen as much before. Now, we can also have experiments that are fully digital that are more like lab experiments. So an example is the paper by Huber et al., which is basically an experiment on mTurk that is not field-like. It's a very finely, intricately tuned experiment to isolate a very particular mechanism about the way people vote. It's a very nice experiment, but it is much more like a lab experiment than a field experiment. But again, they're able to do a lot more because they can take advantage of mechanical Turk, which helps them do certain kinds of things faster and easier.